Well, all eyes have been on Ukraine, and because of it, we forget about what's happening in Syria. But if you remember, Syria is also one of the spots where we are in a proxy war with Russia. Here to give us some insight into what's happening on that front is Kevork Almassian, founder of Syriana Analysis. Kevork, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. Lots to
Thank you,
talk
Kim,
about
for
when it
having me.
comes to what we all, we talk so much about Ukraine. Lots to talk about going on actually in Syria. Let's start off with this deadly attack. There was recently a strike that attacked a convoy carrying Iranian weapons into Syria. Can you tell us about that attack?
Actually, the Syrian conflict has been frozen, especially after the Ukraine war, due to the intensity of the conflict in Ukraine or the importance for Russia and for the United States. However, there are so many frozen fronts in Syria. Sometimes it gets flared, sometimes it is just a truce. What happened, actually, we have to put it into proper context. In 2011, the United States launched a regime change war on Syria. It was a covert operation under the title Timber Sycamore. According to the New York Times, it was one of the costliest covert operations in the history of the CIA. The Saudis, for example, they asked for $2 trillion in order to remove President Bashar al-Assad in 2013. Bandar bin Sultan asked that, or he's called in the United States as Bandar Bush, because he has very close ties with the Bush family. They failed. They have spent over $200 billion in order to remove Assad through training and arming the so-called rebel groups in Syria who were affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS groups. So when the regime change war failed, Trump ended the regime change war in 2017. And in 2017, they changed the plan. There was a plan B. The plan B had three pillars. Number one was sanctions. So the United States imposes draconian sanctions on the Syrian people. They even banned the Syrians from buying medicine, food, and lots of basic necessities from the outside world. They say that these materials or the food and medicine are exempted from the sanctions, but that's not true because Syria isn't allowed to make transactions. The central bank is sanctioned, and any company that receives money from Syria, it will be sanctioned according to the Caesar Act that was adopted in 2018. The second pillar is that the Americans occupy, or the American forces occupy, the oil and the wheat of Syria. Therefore, they wanted to inflict a heavy pain on the Syrian people who stood with their government against this regime change war. So they used the famine as a weapon against the Syrian people. The third, which is now related to what happened now on the borders between Iraq and Syria, the United States occupies different border crossings between Syria and its neighboring countries. One of them is Al Tanaf border crossing, which connects Syria to Jordan and in Iraq. So the Syrians and the Iraqis and the Iranians opened another border crossing because they want to do trade, they want to do business, and also humanitarian aid that comes from different countries. And this border crossing is in Abu Kamal. And this is where exactly when Joe Biden came in power, the first strike that he authorized was on this border crossing in Abu Kamal. And now the Israelis did again similar strike on this because any material or any convoys that come from Iran or from Iraq, they are either humanitarian aid or they're medicine or weapons sometimes. However, when we see the footage now, in the aftermath of this attack on Abu Kamal border crossing, I haven't seen weapon convoys. I haven't seen explosions in the type that there were weapons there. There were so many, for example, masks. I have seen medical equipment, medicine, and even milk. Because I want to say something very important. I have friends now in Syria. They have newborn babies and they cannot find milk for their newborn babies, and this is due to the sanction. So Syria has to import these products from Iran, Iraq, and other friendly countries. And this convoy was attacked. And if I want to relate this attack to what happened in Iran, for example, just I think 2 days ago, there was another drone attack on a military facility in Iran, and it was a drone attack. And in my estimation, this was Israel who conducted this attack, and it could be from Azerbaijani territories because Azerbaijan is considered an advanced satellite country for Israel, an older advanced country to spy on Iran. So this comes, in my opinion, after a green light by the Americans or the American administration to Israel to strike both Syria and Iran in this regard, because for the Americans, this is a very decisive moment. We are living World War III. It's still limited in the scope in Ukraine, but things could go out of control. And if it gets out of control, the Americans want for the Israelis to choose whether they are with Russia or with the Americans. They cannot have 1 feet here and 1 feet there. So the Americans are drawing clear lines. If there is a clash between NATO and Russia, on whose side are you going to be, Israel? I give you now the green light to strike Iran, and you have to see that the Iranians and the Russians will come together, and Russians will condemn the attack, and they will increase the cooperation between the both sides. So there will be more like merging of the interest between the Iranian and the Russian side, and more of merging interest between the Israelis and the Americans. So this is preparation for if there is going to be a wider scale of a war between the United States or NATO and the Russians.
Okay, so amazing information here and a lot to break down. With this deadly attack, just to kind of go over it, the 7 people were killed in this attack. It was a convoy of trucks that were carrying what they claimed, what the reports have been carrying weapons. And what's interesting about the reports is that we hear this term over and over and over again. And so maybe you could clarify this, but they say it was a convoy of Iran-backed groups. They said that they were not Syrians, however. They were non-Syrians, but they were Iran-backed groups. So who were these people?
So every time the United States or Israel conduct strikes in Syria, and there are hundreds of strikes against Syria after 2011, they always say those are either Iranian forces or Iranian-linked forces or groups. So if they have a clear information, they should name. If it's right. Hezbollah, if it's any Iraqi group, or it's a Syrian group. So what's the name of this group that is affiliated to Iran? And whether they are affiliated with Iran or not, I have to ask a question. Is Syria allowed to buy weapons from Iran or not? According to any local laws or international laws, Syrians have the right to buy defensive weapons, for example, to protect their airspace against these strikes that is coming from the Israelis. So let's take this scenario and just an example. Every day there are convoys or planes coming to Israel, into Haifa or in any airports, and they are delivering weapons. Imagine Syria or any other country bombing the facilities of Israel every day and claiming that this is an American-linked airplane or American-linked ship that is delivering weapons to Israel. What kind of logic is this? Every country has the right to protect its territory and its sovereignty. And Syria, after the war, because the so-called rebels were linked to Al-Qaeda, the first thing they did after the war, they occupied the air defense systems, air defense bases of Syria, and they destroyed them all. So Syria now has a shortage of air defense systems, and they're trying to buy them whether from Iran or from Russia. And they have the right to do so because every week Israel is bombing Syria, whether it's in Damascus or in Aleppo or in Homs. And every time after the bombing of Syrian facilities, they say, oh, we bombed Iranian-linked groups. So who are these groups? Sorry, right. They are definitely sometimes, if we calculate how many people died during these airstrikes, there are hundreds of people. And I can assure you 99% of them are Syrians. They're not Iranians, or they're not Iranian-linked groups. They're Syrians dying because the Syrians are the ones who are trying to defend their airspace from these airstrikes coming from Israel.
So let's complicate things a little bit more. Interesting perspective that you're kind of, so just to be clear before I move on to Turkey, kind of getting into the mix here, are you saying that you think that the United States or the West or NATO is sort of behind Israel's recent attacks in Iran and now in Syria with the sort of premise of, okay, do this, and, you know, we'll let you do this, and then when you, or even baiting them into doing it, knowing that it's going to cause a conflict with Russia and they're going to have to choose. So you think that United States or NATO is like the puppet master in this?
If we read, for example, the memos of Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert, they all mention several airstrikes that they authorized on Syria or other players in the region. And every time they had long phone conversations with American presidents and American security and military officials, they always coordinated with the Americans when they conducted these strikes. And they always wanted a green light from the Americans because they don't want also to be exposed in front of a retaliation. If a retaliation comes from Iran or from Syria, they don't want to be alone in a confrontation against these countries. Therefore, I believe this time is not also it's not different this time. This time, however, the United States authorized or gave the green light for the Israelis to strike Iran inside Iran in exchange for a clear stance on the Ukrainian conflict, because the Israelis or the Israeli government, their heart is definitely with the Ukrainian side, with the American side. But at the same time, they have their own calculations in Syria. They are striking Syria many times during the month, and the Russians aren't really intervening in this regard to protect the skies of Syria. But if the Russians supply Syria with advanced air defense systems, due to the increased Israeli intervention in Ukraine, then the warplanes, the fighter jets of Israel, will be targeted by advanced weapon systems. And this is a danger for the Israeli national security from their perspective. So that's why Israel didn't want to intervene directly in Ukraine. But now I think the Americans are pushing their allies. Look how the European Union is acting nowadays. It's like it's a one block. Like all the countries have one opinion, like all the countries have one national security interest, as if they don't have their own interest in this regard. In exception for Hungary, all European countries are siding with the United States in the war in Ukraine. And similarly, in China, for example, in Taiwan, we can see South Korea, Japan, the Philippines are all also coming as a one block now against China in the case if there is any future, let's say, a Chinese attack on Taiwan. So the Americans are readying for a long-term conflict with their foes, Russia and China, and they want their allies to have a clear stance in this regard.
Well, it seems, I'm glad you kind of brought up Taiwan there, because it seems to me that perhaps these strikes that are happening inside of Iran and now Syria could potentially be one of those. We've been accusing with the war in Ukraine, the accusation, or the worry, I should say, is that, well, if we let this go and we see what Russia's doing, then China's going to go after Taiwan. This opens up the door because NATO and the United States is focused on this war in Ukraine, and so we would, maybe China would take the opportunity to split them. Same thing in this regard. It would make me think that perhaps now some are thinking, well, the window is open. The window of opportunity is open now that Russia, which is the biggest ally of Syria and Iran, is too busy engaging in a war with Ukraine. Perhaps now is the time to go in and try to topple Assad and try to topple the regime in Iran. Do you think that's a possibility, or do you think this really is just, trying to, show who you're allied with?
I think, practically speaking, the United States cannot topple the Syrian government or the Iranian government. They tried. They want to wage hybrid warfare against these governments because they know the direct confrontation with these countries means a complete chaos in the entire Middle East, the cut off supply lines for the oil, for the gas. The entire Gulf region will be burned. So it's not something that the Americans can afford at this moment, because the retaliation will be very big. However, what's happening is to bring different countries into blocks, into groupings, into groups, and make them move as one block against the foes of the United States. I don't think the Americans are capable of overthrowing any regime now, whether it's in Iran or it's in Syria. They spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on a small country like Syria, and they couldn't overthrow the government there because there was a popular support and also in the support of Russia and Iran. So increasing intervention of the Americans in the region are also bringing different countries on the same side. Look, Iran and Russia, they have different national security and geopolitical interests in the Middle East. They don't share the same geopolitical interests all the time. But because of the American let's say, engineered coups d'etats and regime change wars and trying to destabilize different countries in the region, these countries are becoming closer to each other. Like in the entire history, I haven't seen China and Russia are on the same page as much as they are now. And this is happening because of this American, let's say, offensive on Russia and China. These countries are obliged to come more and more together. Otherwise, they will perish individually. Right.
So this is where things get weird, right? Because now Turkey. So then you bring Turkey into the mix. And Turkey's a NATO country. supposedly allied with the West and NATO, obviously. And now they are actually eyeing reconciliation with Syria. They were once attacking Assad, and now they're actually looking to partner back up in a way, I should say, or be friendly and to recognize that government. That kind of throws a wrench into things. What's your take on that?
So Turkey was tasked by the United States. Turkey and Qatar were tasked by the United States to lead this regime change war in Syria. Were it not for Turkey, we have 800-kilometer shared borders with Turkey. Were it not for Turkey, not a single multinational jihadist would have been able to come to Syria. So all these multinational jihadists with tens of thousands came from a NATO country where one of the biggest NATO bases are in southern Turkey, where they can see all this influx of the jihadists coming into Syria. So Erdogan wanted to play this role at the beginning. He was a good friend with Assad. He turned his back on Assad. Okay. But after 11 and 12 years, today the inflation in Turkey is over 160%. 160%. The economic situation is very dire. There is no regional business with the Middle East because the direct border with Syria is closed and it's occupied by the Kurdish militias. And additionally, you have 3.5 million refugees from Syria in Turkey. So Turkey is a very difficult situation. They want to solve this with Assad right now because first they want to return 3.5 million refugees to Syria with the growing economic, let's say, hardship there, and also with the growing negative sentiments towards the refugees by the Turkish media and by the ruling government there. And two, they want to solve their issue with Syria in order to push the Kurdish militias at least 30 kilometers away from the borders. For the Turks, this is a very important case. They don't want armed Kurdish militias on the borders that have an enmity, they're enemies with Turkey. And third, this is the most important thing. Russia promised Iran that it can become an energy hub in the region and in Europe. There are new gas deals between the Gazprom and the Turk Stream in order to extend pipelines from Russia into the territories of Turkey, and from Turkey it can also go to Europe and into different countries. So if there is a chaos in the Middle East, if your neighboring country is in a war zone, if you have Kurdish militias on the borders, you're not able to become an energy hub. You need stability in order to play this role. So the interest of Turkey, its interest is now to make a deal with Assad. And I think before the elections, the foreign ministers of Syria and Turkey will meet in order to solve this situation. But a meeting between Assad and Erdogan, I don't think is possible right now. The Syrians are not in a hurry, and they're going to wait after the elections to see who's going to come to power in Turkey.
Interesting. Okay, just real quick, big picture overview. What does this mean on the grand stage? I mean, you've mentioned we're already in World War III. What do you predict, or what do you see? Where do you see all this headed?
Unfortunately, I'm not optimistic. I'm not well trained to see what's going to happen in the future. But the facts on the ground indicate that the NATO side is going to escalate in Ukraine, and the delivery of the tanks will open the gate for delivering harder, let's say, heavier.
Well, they're talking about F-16s. I mean, Poland is talking about sending them some F-16s.
Kim, the former ambassador of Ukraine in Germany, who was kicked out from Germany for glorifying Stepan Bandera, who was one of the perpetrators of the Holocaust against the Jews during World War II, and the ally of Hitler directly, and he was the ambassador of Ukraine in Germany, by the way. He's now asking the Germans to send their submarines to Ukraine, and he's asking for long-range missiles. That means if something like this happens, we are going definitely into World War III. And it's already happening, but the scope will be bigger. And I'm not trying to fearmonger, but such type of a weaponry, if they arrive in Ukraine, it will definitely lead into World War III.
Yeah, tanks are one thing. F-16s, submarines, all of these other things are an entirely different leveling up of the conflict. And I agree with you. I do think that would absolutely escalate things to a level that I don't think any of us are really very comfortable with. Kevork, you are so fascinating. You bring us so much insight. Thank you so much for being here. Kevork Almassian, he's an award-winning political commentator from Syria, also the founder of Syriana Analysis. Am I saying that correctly, Syriana Analysis?
Yes, you're saying it correct. Thank you
Kevork,
so
thank
much,
you
Kim.
so
I
much.
follow your work for a long time, and I appreciate your work, really. Thank you very
Oh,
much.
thank you so much. Thank you.